Oh boy, I sure do love making my silly little videos about the silly little cards. I sure am happy that I'm partway through making this rock video one. It would be a real shame if anything happened that completely threw off my groove.
まずはこちらです。リニアマグナムプラスマイナス。
Well, leave it to Konami to do something completely unexpected out of nowhere. As of earlier today, we have finally received the words of some new anime cards that are finally being printed, though it is not in Animation Chronicles, that's still MIA. The limited pack GX Osiris Red is an exclusive made-to-order set that Konami will be releasing in early May. And while it likely isn't replacing Animation Chronicles, it is carrying the torch a bit by releasing some new anime cards. And while it does suck that there is only 10 of them, Konami did make it a bit nicer by actually telling us 3 of the cards we were getting, and it just so happens that one of them ties into a video that I was very deep into working on. Okay, actually there's 2 of them. We also got Chaos Distill, which is part of Alchemy Beast, but I'm not gonna talk about that. Conduction Warrior Linear Magnum Plus Minus was not a card I was expecting to just randomly be revealed, but it has been on my mind the entire day because this is one of those cards I've been waiting to be printed, and I'm so excited to see what changes with it. Though this does raise a very awkward point for me. As I've been working on the Anime Rocks video, I got the entire scripted part for the Magnet Warrior segment already finished, and if this set does release in May, or at the very least has its reveals in May, I will probably not be getting that video out before we find out what's going on with these cards. So instead of just letting all of my hard work go to waste, I decided let's just cut that segment out and make it its own entire video, because I actually do have a lot I want to say about the GX magnets. I'm going to be reading the script wholesale as I wrote it, though there is one thing I do want to note that's not going to be brought up in this video. We actually don't know if we are getting the rest of the magnet cards, and depending on if we do or if we don't, that could actually change how Linear Magnum is perceived due to its effect needing to be changed to be generic with the rest of the Magnet Warriors. So I figured I might as well just bring that up, just in case it is the only one we get. So with that said, let's cut over to Past Me, back when I scripted this, before these cards were revealed. Second GX rock archetype is Magnet Warriors, which had a weird offshoot used by Bastion during 2 duels with none of their cards being printed, and I think I know as to why. To explain, let's look at their first 2 monsters, Magnet Warrior Sigma Plus and Magnet Warrior Sigma Minus. Aside from ditching the standard Magnet Warrior naming scheme, they're both level 4 rocks, but also have their own ability types, similar to things like Gemini and Flip, Plus being a plus monster and Minus being, well, a minus monster. Sigma Plus has the effect that it cannot do battle with a plus monster, but must battle a minus monster if it's able to. And Minus has the same thing, but in reverse. I do get the idea of making it so that they function like actual magnets, attracting and repelling based on their polarity, but I think that ultimately doomed them to being unprinted. Outside of abilities that are tied to new summoning mechanics, the last time we got a new ability type was Tactical Evolution with Gemini monsters, which was almost 2 decades ago. Which makes me believe Konami doesn't want to print any new ability types. In fact, it's the same reason I believe why Armor hasn't been printed, despite being such a highly requested archetype, since it has its own entirely new ability type. And to be honest, I can understand why they wouldn't want to print an ability type as hyper-specific as Plus and Minus. An entire ability type that only interacts with each other and only for battle-related effects would be really lame and not really worth jumping through the necessary hoops to implement. So the obvious solution to this would be removing the ability types, but I don't think that's something Konami really wants to do since it would remove the flavor of these cards. Without the ability types, these are functionally vanilla monsters. That being said, I think there is an easy compromise to fixing this issue, and that's with counters. Instead, making these cards interact with plus and minus counters would be a good workaround, especially since some of their back row makes monsters into plus and minus cards, and those could be changed to instead give a plus or minus counter. I also like the idea of them being able to give an opponent's monster a counter themselves. That way you aren't forced to rely on your back row in order to make use of these effects. Naturally, they'll likely keep the battle-related effect, but I think another cool idea for these guys would be letting them special summon themselves from hand if the opposite counter is on the field, playing into the idea of opposites attracting by literally pulling themselves onto the field. So that's a good basis for each of them, but they do need to have unique effects in order to set them apart aside from what counters they interact with. And we already have a good basis thanks to Delta and Epsilon. Both of them have the ability to Foolish a Magnet Warrior, Delta just doing the Foolish, while Epsilon does it to revive a magnet with a different name. As such, giving them the ability to send a magnet to the graveyard to apply different effects would be a good idea. And again, to keep it thematic with the opposites attracting, I think we should let them search one that places the opposite counters, plus sending a guy to search a magnet that places a minus counter, and vice versa for minus. It gives the warriors even more consistency and allows them to swarm the field much easier to make plays, which is especially nice since magnet warriors do have a bit of trouble getting guys onto the field. Also, I'm saying they search guys who place their respective counters rather than mention them, because they both mention the counters due to their battle effects. The one downside with these proposed changes is that you need your opponent to have a guy to swarm since they can't place counters on themselves, though that was an intentional design choice I made, since magnets can already vomit a ton of material on the field without locking themselves, and if you combine them with adamanticators, things get really crazy, especially with something that I'm gonna bring up with the next card. The other two Magnet Warriors are Magnet Warrior Omega Minus and Magnet Warrior Omega Plus. Magnet Warrior Omega Plus. Omega Plus! Okay, so I have just been informed that there isn't actually an Omega Plus, which leaves Omega Minus as an awkward one-off. I'm just gonna assume that Omega Plus got lost in the void along with the rest of Bastion's screen time. Omega Minus is just a copy of Sigma Minus with better stats, so naturally we'll be giving him all the bells and whistles that the others have, counterplacing, a special summoning condition, and a unique effect along with a Foolish. And in this case, I'm gonna suggest something that I think we will be getting regardless of if these cards are printed or not. A searcher for the back row. Magnet and magnetic spell traps are currently unsearchable, so making a guy who can grab them would obviously be really good, but this whole thing becomes even more crazier when you factor in magnet induction, which, while you control a magnet warrior, special summons one from deck. This already has an insanely good combo with Delta, since Delta can send a warrior from deck to grave, then induction can summon out Epsilon, who can then revive that magnet. So having Omega send a magnet to grave to grab induction sets up this combo, which is amplified by the Sigmas. If you open Sigma Minus, you can send a guy to search Sigma Plus, while also placing a counter allowing you to special out Sigma Plus. Then Sigma Plus can search for Omega and place a counter to allow Omega to be summoned out, who then sends a third magnet in order to grab induction. You can then use induction to bin a fourth magnet and bring out one of your first two frees, which can then trigger their on summon effect. Be it Beta the Electromagnet Warrior to search out another magnet such as Sigma Minus, who still hasn't used their special summoning condition, Alpha the Electromagnet Warrior, who can grab Berserkion, which will have all of its materials in the graveyard thanks to all the dumping, and a ton of guys to banish for the removal effect, or even Delta for a 5th Foolish Burial, and the ability to make Valkyrion when it hits the graveyard. And that's on top of having 5 bodies on field, including multiple 4s to make Granite Galleons, which can then grab Adamantipator Researcher for even more field presence, and her levels line up with the Electromagnets to make Naturia Beast. Yeah, this is kind of why I said you would have to place counters on enemies rather than your own guys, because none of this stuff locks you, so it'd be kind of ridiculous to have this much swarming, graveyard setup, and removal available so freely, while being able to flex it into anything you want in your extra deck, and all of it off of one card. Now, part of this swarming are the effects of the Sigmas, who are rather wishful thinking when it comes to their effects, but I do feel like an effect like Omega's is extremely likely, even though it'll probably make it onto a different Magnet Warrior first. Naturally, no trio of Magnet Warriors would be complete without their own Magnet Warrior, except this one, which instead got Conduction Warrior Linear Magnum Plus Minus. It's a level 7 rock with the Plus Minus ability because Konami hates all of us, has 2700 attack, and must first be special summoned by tributing Sigma Plus and Omega Minus, from hand or field. And it gains half the attack for a plus or minus monster on the field. First of all, you're Magna Warrior. Second of all, you're now a level 8. The fact that it both doesn't have Magna Warrior in its name and isn't a level 8 makes it unsearchable by Alpha, which is an oversight that needs to be corrected. Thirdly, the effect to gain the attack of a monster should now be changed to being counter-related so it fits with how we've been making these magnets work. But it should also gain the attack of a monster it battles with a counter so it functions like how it did in the anime. Also, I think it should be allowed to attack all monsters with plus or minus counters on them once each, not only allowing you to get more use out of that attack boost, but also because the setup we mentioned earlier would allow this to be searched off of Alpha, while using your free magnets to place counters, allowing you to set up some insanely good OTKs with Linear Magnum. And given Berserkion is the one we want to use for removal, I think this is the one that we should be using for an OTK. We could also change the summoning condition to be the same as Berserkion's, letting you banish the 2 monsters from graveyard for the summoning allowing you to link them off first to then climb into something like Dogu. Finally, I think it should have the same floating effect as Berserkion to summon back the materials upon destruction. That's a lot of suggested changes to mainly bring this thing in line with Berserkion, but I think it would allow it to be significantly better than it currently is, and would give it a very good niche in the deck. Oh, and in case you're wondering what I did to keep the plus-minus thing intact, the first of the Magnet back row is Magnet Conduction Plus, which just lets you add a plus monster from grave to hand, which is just Sigma Plus, making it the warrior returning alive for a single guy. Now the obvious change would be giving it the effect to make it work with all Magnet warriors, and that is what I'm expecting to happen, but aside from the fact that there's another spell we'll be talking about later on that's gonna completely outclass it, both of them are already outclassed by Animancipator Signs. It's a monster reborn for rocks that has the bonus effect of stacking the top of your deck if you revive an Animancipator. I guess we could also give Conduction the ability to place a counter by banishing itself from the graveyard, or allow it to search from deck if the opponent controls a monster with a counter, but as for its main use, it's very outclassed. Power Off makes me incredibly infuriated. It's a quick play that lets you send a plus-minus monster you control to graveyard, so Linear Magnum, to resummon the monsters used for its special summon. If you have even a passing familiarity with this game, you'd probably realize that this is basically just Defusion but for Linear Magnum, which just serves as a reminder that Valkyrion was originally a fusion monster in the original manga, before being forced into the main deck. The most embarrassing part is that it sends the monster to the graveyard rather than bounces it. The only situation where this is beneficial is if we get a guy you can make with Epsilon, because Epsilon can actually resummon a Magna warrior that was properly summoned. It just rarely comes up because the only one you're properly summoning is Berserkion. I could see other changes possibly being added, maybe banishing itself to protect the Magna warrior, but to be completely honest, I'm overall more annoyed at this card rather than interested in seeing it, so let's move on. Their first trap is 100,000 Gauze, and it can only be activated if you control a plus and a minus monster. It switches an opponent's monster that is in defense to attack, and reduces its attack by 800. I'm not gonna act surprised or shocked that something this mid exists. It was the GX era where mediocre battle traps still had a niche, and the only thing that would make it more of its time is if it had an out of place burn effect. I could see this being worth considering if it also negated the monster's effects, as well as loosening the condition to be that you have to control a Magnet warrior. Heck, we could even take a note from the Blackwing trap and let you activate it from the hand if you control a Magna warrior. Though honestly, the most interesting thing about this card to me is that in the dub, they used the wrong artwork for this card, instead using the artwork for another unreleased Bastion trap called Last Magnet, which equips itself to an opponent's battling monster and reduces their attack by 800. I'm guessing the people working on the dub thought they were the same card given how similar the effects are. The last Magnet traps are Magnet Force Plus and Magnet Force Minus. Both these cards do the exact same thing, equipping to a monster and turning it into a plus or minus monster respectively. Naturally, these wouldn't work the same way given how we changed magnets, so instead let's make it so they place counters. And I can maybe see them being alright if instead of placing one counter, they could continuously place counters each turn, like a little counter generator. Though given how we changed the main deck guys, I don't think it would be necessary, unless we gave them additional effects. Overall though, these are really just boring. Also, I hate how the artwork of these cards don't match. Like, Minus feels in line with the Minus warrior appearing on it, and was first used so it makes sense to be the template when they make the plus one, but Force Plus is just a battery, which makes it look less like a Magnet warrior card and more like a Battery Man card. Which does segue into the one overall thing I dislike about these cards. They don't look like Magnet warriors. I get the idea of giving them effects to tie into the Magnet theming, but the designs of these look so far removed from the original theme that it makes me wonder how these were supposed to be part of the same archetype. Magnet warriors had a very distinct visual style that made them look kind of like robots, but they had a very rocky texture that made it clear that they weren't like any other machines. And even when the Electromagnet warriors released and looked more like robots, it was not only understandable because, you know, it's electromagnets, but they still had some magnets on them, so it was made clear that they were Magnet warriors. These guys, on the other hand, just looked like generic robots. There's nothing tying them into being Magnet warriors, not even actual magnets. In fact, you could very easily justify them not even being rock. A card I didn't talk about in this video was Plasma Warrior Eptiom, which was the big boss monster of this series, but more importantly, it's also not a rock monster. instead being a Thunder, even though it looks identical to the rest of them. And you could very easily turn all these into Thunder monsters unrelated to Magnet Warriors instead, and not really change much. That's not me asking for them to do it, as I personally will take any new Magnet Warrior squad we get. It just feels like they didn't truly belong to magnets due to the very generic visual design. I hope you don't take this as me not being excited for these cards though, because despite not really caring for them visually as much, I have still been very excited for these cards to get released. Maybe I'll make a video talking about my thoughts on them when we actually do get their effects. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this video. My name is Era, and have a good night everyone.